Mia, you're being absurd. You don't need this as much as Eric does. During what should have been a happy housewarming party, my mother exclaimed, waving the act in my face. He needs to provide for his family. What have you got? Only you. I felt like I was slapped across the face by the words. I was standing in the kitchen of the house that I had saved all of my life for. I was having trouble breathing as my entire life fell apart. I'm Mia Reynolds, and at 33, I never thought my own family would turn on me. Such like this. I had been working double shifts as a nurse at Memorial Hospital for the past 10 years in order to save as much money as possible and gain more hours in the intensive care unit. I used my $175,000 life savings to help my parents purchase a new home while they were facing foreclosure on their previous one. Since I made the down payment, it was very clear that the house would be in my name. However, it seems that my family doesn't really care about agreements. My mom's golden kid from her second marriage, my stepbrother Eric, was standing there grinning smugly as usual. He had never given our parents a cent since he was constantly too preoccupied with discovering who he was and bouncing from one failed business endeavor to another. At 38, however, he unexpectedly got married and had a baby on the way, which seemed to make him more worthy of my investment. The paperwork is already in the file. George, my stepfather, spoke out without even meeting my eyes. Eric is currently the owner of the house. You ought to be content. Your brother is starting a family with your support. His nonchalant dismissal of my sacrifice infuriated me. I had fell in love with the stunning colonial-style home. The place I had envisioned as a hub for family vacations and festivities was being given to someone who hadn't merited it. Observing the faces of the friends and extended family who had come to rejoice around the room, the uncomfortable looks and hushed exchanges were visible to me. Standing in the corner, shaking her head in shock, was my Aunt Sarah, who had always been more like a mother to me than my own mother. Rachel, my best friend, has seen me push myself to the bone to save that money. I held her glass so tightly that I was afraid it would break. This is incorrect. My voice quivered with a mixture of hurt and rage, but I managed to utter it. I had nothing but that money. We made a deal. Stop being so theatrical, please. My mother's eye rolling on her side. You work as a nurse. You'll put it aside once more. Eric's baby needs a secure home. You don't really have anyone to support. Something inside of me exploded at that moment. Years of being the trustworthy and accountable one. When I saw their entitled looks, the person who always gave up for others fell apart. This wouldn't end here, I knew. They didn't know what I could do if I was pushed too hard. I was always aware as a child that my parents saw me differently than Eric. My mom remarried George after my dad died when I was 6 years old. Eric swept into our life in less than a year and quickly became the focal point of their entire world. In order to save money for college, I worked part-time at the neighborhood drugstore and studied on the weekends. Eric received countless second chances, fancy clothes, and brand new cars. I pushed myself through nursing school, took out student loans that I'm still repaying, and worked evenings as a certified nurse assistant. The car wash, the supplement company, and the Bitcoin investment opportunity were all unsuccessful business endeavors for Eric. To help him, my parents would spend all of their money. Even though I witnessed their retirement slipping away, I remained silent while watching them mortgage their home 3 times to make up for his faults. I didn't think twice when they called me 6 months ago crying and in a desperate situation because they were going to lose their house. Dreaming of a tiny cottage with a garden where I could finally establish roots, I had been saving for my own home. Rather, I offered them my funds in the hopes that it would at last show them how valuable I was. I fell in love with the Colonial on Maple Street over the weeks we spent seeing homes together. I signed the first papers, and the realtor worked with us to make it happen. As the proprietor, "Honey, you are truly a blessing," my mother had stated it while giving me a strong hug. "As a family, we'll make this work." I trusted her. I disregarded the warning indicators because I really wanted to believe her. The private phone conversations with Eric, the uninvited sessions with their attorney, how they postponed the last documents. Rachel had made an effort to alert me. "Get it everything in writing, Mia." One morning over coffee she had stated, "I don't think they'll treat you well." However, I stood up for them since I was sure they wouldn't steal from me even if they preferred Eric. What kind of parents would harm their own daughter in that way? After all, I had spent hours selecting new decor for what I believed to be my investment property at Target the day before the housewarming party. I purchased cheery throw pillows for the living room, fluffy towels for the bathrooms, and a welcome mat with the words "Home Sweet Home" on it. All of those things now seemed like mean jokes strewn about a house that had been taken from me. I remembered all the nights I'd spent working in the intensive care unit, the holidays I'd missed, the relationships I'd put on wait, and the vacations I'd never taken, all to save that money as I stood in that kitchen, watching Eric brag about how he'd earned all of this. My savings had not only been taken, years of my life had been stolen by them. Around me, the celebration went on. My mind was racing. The guests were beginning to go, avoiding eye contact with me, as they awkwardly congratulated Eric. Staring at my phone, I sat by myself at the kitchen counter, as Rachel moved to sit next to me. "You should give Marcus a call," she said, referring to her brother, a real estate lawyer. "There is an issue with the way the deed was transferred. Without your signature, they couldn't have done this lawfully." At that moment, Eric and his wife Jessica passed by, while loudly discussing their plans for renovations. As he ran his palm over the granite countertop I had assisted in choosing, he declared, "We'll probably gut the kitchen first. To truly make it our own, we might have taken down a wall." My gut churned. As I glanced around the kitchen, I saw the folder of documents my parents had shown me at the beginning of our agreement. While everyone was preoccupied with Eric's ambitious plans, it remained on top of the refrigerator where Mom normally put critical documents. Silently, I picked it up and put it in my bag. I need to breathe. As I made my way to the back porch, I told Rachel. I went outside and with shaking hands took out the papers. The original contract I had signed explicitly indicating that the house would be in my name in return for the down payment was there. Then I discovered another item. 2 weeks ago, their lawyer issued them a letter alerting them to the possibility that transferring the deed without my permission could be construed as fraud. My mom texted me and my phone chimed. "Quit pouting outside. Return inside and celebrate your brother's success." I realized then what I needed to accomplish. The money was no longer the only consideration. This has to do with defending myself. After being ignored for years, I texted Marcus with trembling hands. "Are you free tomorrow? I require legal assistance." He answered in a flash. I heard what occurred from Rachel. "At 9 a.m., come to my office. Bring all of your documents." My mom and George were gathered with Eric in the living room, perhaps making further ideas for my house, when I returned inside. With a mixture of disgust and dismissal, they looked up as I walked into their faces. Decided to quit being dramatic at last. My mother raised an eyebrow in question. I surprised them by managing a tiny smile. "In fact, I'd like to express my gratitude." Calmly, I said, "I can now plainly see things thanks to you." They exchanged bewildered glances, obviously anticipating more sobs or entreaties. However, I was finished. Begging, completed, being the dependable daughter who never failed to deliver, even when she received no compensation. Eric laughed and said, "See," as I picked up my purse to get out. "She's all right. She will go past it." I made one final turnaround. "I'm not going to move on Eric. You'll wish I had, though." To calm myself, I gripped a coffee cup as I sat in Marcus's office the following morning. He shook his head and took notes as he went over the papers strewn all over his desk. He gave me a small smile as he gazed up at me after what seemed like hours. "They've really screwed up here, Mia." He held up the warning letter from the lawyer. "Not only is the deed transfer dubious, it is fraudulent. You signed the first documents, made the down payment, and the agreement is well documented. A house that was supposed to belong to you cannot be legally given away. However, they did so already." With a cracked voice, I answered, "Eric's name is on the deed." "You can reverse a fraudulent transfer," Marcus said, grabbing his phone. "Additionally, this case would be of great interest to a friend of mine who works in the DA's office. In fact, they might face criminal prosecution for what they did." His words made my heart race. "Are you facing criminal charges?" I do not wish for my parents to be imprisoned. Despite everything, I was still hesitant when I considered them being in legal jeopardy. "Listen to me," Marcus forcefully stated. "You lost $175,000 to them. Grand theft, that is. They were dishonest. Additionally, it appears from these bank statements that they may have falsified your signature on a few of the documents. They're hoping you'll be too kind to defend yourself." He was correct. They had relied on me to be the understanding one my entire life, the one who would give up without protest as we conversed. My mom's texts kept buzzing on my phone, alternating between requests that I quit being immature and guilt trips. "What are you interested in doing?" Marcus inquired. I inhaled deeply as they closely observed me. "I want them to realize that they can no longer treat me in this manner, and I want my house back." After giving a nod, Marcus began to type on his computer. To stop them from making any alterations to the property, I'm submitting an urgent injunction. After that, we'll take legal action to prevent the transfer. By tomorrow, papers will be served to them. For the first time since the housewarming celebration, I felt lighter in some way as I walked out of his office. I was not trembling or weeping. Rather, I experienced an odd feeling of peace. My phone burst with notifications midway through the drive to work my nightly shift in the intensive care unit. Eric had made 7 calls. My mother had made 12 calls. Dozens of text messages from scared to angry were sent. I smiled at the final one Eric gave me. How on earth did you accomplish that? I put my phone on silent and concentrated on my patients. Give them time to panic. Give them a small portion of the worry they had given me. They would discover tomorrow just what happens if you push the sweet girl too far. Pandemonium broke out the following morning. Rachel called to inform me that my mom and Eric were causing a commotion outside my apartment while I was getting ready for work. They were indeed there when I peeked out my window. Eric pacing back and forth as my mother rapped on the front door of the building. This must end. When I eventually walked downstairs, my mother yelled, "Our family will be torn apart by this." "That's quite wealthy," I answered, amazingly composed. "When you took my life savings, you weren't concerned about upsetting the family." Anger burning in his face. Eric took a step forward. "You're acting absurdly. I am expecting a baby. In any case, what were you intending to do with that house? Do you and your kitties live there alone?" I said. "Actually," and took out my phone. "Here is the documentation of our initial agreement. Do you want to view your lawyer's letter alerting you to the fact that this was against the law? Or ought we to discuss the documents on which my signature was falsified?" Their faces lost their color. My mother took hold of my arm. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "We can resolve this as a family, honey. Lawyers are not necessary." I took her hand away gently. Once you determined that my life savings were worthless, we ceased to be a family. I advise you to discuss reversing the deed transfer with your lawyer, unless you want things to go worse, because the DA's office now has copies of everything. You would imprison your own mother." She let out a gasp. Her eyes were filled with tears. It was the same tears that had affected me so many times in the past. "You could put yourself in jail, Mama. All I'm doing is defending myself." Eric opened his mouth to speak, but his phone rang. It was Jessica, his wife. As she informed him that the police were at their home, their real home, with inquiries regarding the deed transfer. I could hear her frantic voice across the speaker. After that, they hurried off to deal with the impending catastrophe. Rachel came up and gave me a hug after keeping an eye on me from her car. She added with pride, "Now I've never seen you stand up to them like that." I answered that I had never before seen evidence of their manipulation, my word against theirs at all times. However, I've written down everything this time. Marcus called me later that day to let me know that Eric and my parents' attorney had gotten in touch. They desired to make a settlement. In addition to returning the house to me, they would also cover my legal bills and other damages. They had finally realized that I wasn't going to back down when I threatened to charge me with a crime. "Shall we accept the offer?" Marcus inquired. I firmly answered yes, but I also wanted them to sign another document, a declaration acknowledging their specific actions. They cannot act as though this never occurred. After 2 weeks, I waited in Marcus's office as Eric and my dad signed the documents. Along with a settlement that covered my legal bills and an extra $50,000 in damages, the deed was being returned to me. More significant, though, was the notarized declaration they were signing admitting to trying to deceive me. George looked at the floor while my mom, who was crying uncontrollably, wiped at her eyes with a tissue. Eric appeared to have aged by a decade. A tightened jaw took the place of the arrogant smile. After learning that he had been concealing their own financial difficulties, his wife Jessica had divorced him. It seems that the house heist was only the beginning. The notary pointed to the last page and stated, "I need all parties to sign here." They signed one by one. Then it was my time. My hand did not tremble. Eric got up and murmured, "I hope you're happy. Everything is damaged by you." "No," I said coolly. "When you chose to steal from me, you destroyed everything. I simply fixed it." My mom made one final attempt to get my attention as they left the office. I looked away. The days of manipulation and guilt trips were ended. Marcus grinned as he gave me the new deed. "Well done. Officially, the house is yours." Actually, though, I had one more surprise in store for them. Taking out another set of papers, I said, I want to get rid of it. I am aware that in an attempt to maintain their good reputation with friends and family, my family has already told others about their miscommunication with the house. They were unaware that a developer had made me an offer to convert the land into apartments. The price was far higher than the going rate. When they learn, they will be incensed. Later, when we were celebrating at our favorite coffee shop, Rachel said, they assumed you would allow them to remain there. I'm selling precisely for that reason, I answered. They must realize that they are no longer in control of me. I signed the papers to sell the house the next day. The developer was overjoyed. I was at last free, and my real estate agent was overjoyed. I was able to purchase my ideal cottage with a garden and still had money left over thanks to the sales profit and the settlement money. My mom's voicemail sounded on my phone as I was leaving the closure. She begged me to give her a call back while sobbing and stating she had heard about the auction. Without hearing the conclusion, I erased it. I refer to it as boundaries, while some may call it cruel. I was not going to burn myself alive to keep them warm for the first time in my life. Let them make their own decisions. I needed to plant a garden and decorate a cottage. The weeks after the house's sale were life-changing. Just outside the city, I discovered a quaint cottage with a wraparound porch and a large enough yard for a garden. It had always been my dream, along with helping me move in. Rachel and I painted the walls a variety of gentle, serene hues. The daring plans my mother had always maintained were inappropriate for a family house were nothing like that. My phone continued to flash with family messages on a regular basis. Some were upset, accusing me of being self-centered for selling the house before my parents had a chance to work things out. Others tried to guilt-trip me by informing me that my mother sobbed herself to sleep. The only person who supported me in informing the others that they ought to feel guilty for their actions was my Aunt Sarah. Sarah told me at Sunday lunch that she had met your mother at the grocery store. She was ranting about your lack of gratitude to anybody who would listen. However, most individuals are now aware of the truth. The statement you forced them to sign has gone viral. I grinned as I considered how the story had changed. I was no longer the challenging daughter who refused to support her brother. I was now the diligent nurse whose funds had been attempted to be stolen by her relatives. My mother was no longer successful in her attempts to play the victim. After formally divorcing Jessica, Eric returned to live with our parents. He was working as a sales clerk at an electronics store, which was his first meaningful job in years, according to rumors I heard. On my way to work, I would occasionally drive by their rented home. It was a small place, nothing like the house they had attempted to rob me of. Seeing them struggle didn't make me happy, but I sensed that justice was being served. After I stopped allowing my family to consume all of my resources and energy, things started to improve. I could concentrate on my work. I applied for and was promoted to charge nurse, which came with a large pay increase and improved hours. My coworkers saw that I had changed. I stopped taking all the holiday shifts because other people had actual families to spend time with, smiled more, and advocated for myself in meetings. My mom's number appeared on my phone one evening as I was planning my garden and enjoying the sunset from my porch. I declined the call with a sense of serenity instead of the typical anxiousness. I listened to her voicemail later. She asked if I could give Eric some extra cash for rent. I erased the message and returned to my gardening catalog because he was having a very difficult time at the moment. I had placed an order for seeds for my favorite violets, tomatoes, and cucumbers. They had already set up the flower beds. The earth is fertile and awaiting new growth. It seemed to be a metaphor for my own life in a manner. I was prepared to cultivate something lovely after pulling out the weeds of poisonous relationships. I should create a book called How to Stop Being a Doormat in 3 Easy Steps. Rachel would often quip. Perhaps she was correct. It just required me to lose my life savings, confront my family, and ultimately prioritize myself. Easy, really. My life had found a calm rhythm 6 months after I sold the house. With violets blossoming in tidy rows and the first tomatoes ripening on the vine, my garden was flourishing. I had joined a local reading club, made friends with my neighbors, and even resumed dating after years of putting it off due to the demands on my time and energy from my family. Although the family turmoil had not entirely vanished, I had developed new coping mechanisms. Even yet, my mother made a consistent effort to get in touch, particularly when they needed money. I always stayed inside my limits. I can't be of any assistance. Calmly, I would respond. That phrase became my shield, protecting me from their manipulation, regardless of how many tears or guilt trips followed. Things had become worse for Eric. When Jessica filed for divorce, my nephew, who was the infant, lived mostly with her. After learning that Eric had opened credit cards in her name, she found herself deeply in debt. I put her in touch with Marcus when she sought my counsel, and he assisted her in navigating the legal maze. Assisting someone who truly deserved it was satisfying. A familiar automobile arrived into my driveway one Sunday morning as I was working in my garden. My mother appeared older and more worn out than I had recalled when she went outside. She had arrived without warning, most likely in an attempt to surprise me. Hovering at the fence, she whispered, "Your garden is beautiful. You've always had a talent with plants." "Thank you," I said. "I'm still working on my plants. However, you should contact before coming here." "Yes, I am aware. Honey, I miss you. Additionally, your father and I are selling our home, which I wanted to let you know. We are no longer able to afford it, and Eric's costs." She looked at me as she drifted off. "Hopefully." I brushed the dirt off my knees and got to my feet. "I'm not giving you any money, Mom. We've closed that chapter. I didn't request it." She got begun, then stopped. "Well, perhaps I was, but can you really blame me for wishing that you and your family were doing well? Don't family members steal from one another?" I spoke aggressively. "Families don't try to defend theft or falsify signatures because they believe one child is more deserving. Mom, you made your decision. You now have to deal with the fallout." She cried as she walked away. I didn't feel bad, though. Rather, I took pride in upholding my boundaries. I threw a little dinner party for Rachel, Sarah, and a few co-workers later that night. I came to a deep realization while we were sipping wine on my patio and observing the fireflies dancing in my garden. This was the true definition of family. It had nothing to do with blood or duty. It was about respect, choice, and sincere concern for one another. To limits. With a knowing smile, Rachel raised her glass in toast. Thinking of my growing garden and my even more flourishing spirit, I added, to growth. 1 year has gone by since I confronted my family, and I'm still in awe of how much my life has changed. My cabin has turned into a haven of warmth and tranquility that I never experienced when my family was around. Last year, the garden yielded so many veggies that I began giving the excess to the nearby food bank. I sometimes remember how my mother used to make fun of my gardening interest, saying it was a waste of time. It now makes me happy and benefits others. Without the continual burden of household emergencies, my career has thrived. My co-workers frequently remark on how much more confident I've gotten since I was just promoted to nursing supervisor. I no longer feel guilty about declining extra shifts or using vacation days when I need to relax. I learned to set boundaries everywhere else by doing so at home. I'm kind of a local legend at the hospital, Rachel jokes. In addition to patient care, new nurses ask me for advice on how to defend oneself in trying circumstances. A young nurse thanked me last week for giving her the confidence to leave an abusive relationship. "I can stand up to one person if you can stand up to your entire family," she remarked. "Even though my parents and Eric still face difficulties, I am no longer responsible for them. They made the same decisions that I did. Allowing others to suffer the repercussions of their actions can sometimes be the most compassionate thing you can do for both them and yourself. Retaliation is no longer the focus. It's about self-respect and personal development. They took money, but it was just money. However, the benefits of confronting them were invaluable. My autonomy and self-esteem. I discovered an old picture of my family at the housewarming celebration the other day, shot right before things went wrong. Observing their arrogant expressions, I came to the realization that I no longer feel angry. Instead, I'm thankful. The fact that they betrayed me made me stronger. Someone who respects herself enough to leave unhealthy relationships, especially if they are cloaked in familial ties. This spring, my garden is beginning to bloom once more. Sarah frequently comes to visit, and her youngsters like helping me plant fresh flowers. During our weekly coffee meetups, Rachel and I joke about how much I've changed from the person who used to take all of my family's demanding phone calls. Sometimes even Jessica invites my nephew around. She claims that the garden also helps her heal. Although life isn't flawless, it is now truly mine. I've discovered that getting even isn't always the best form of retaliation. It's about improving. Every flower in my yard, every quiet evening on my porch, and every boundary I uphold serve as reminders that I made my own decisions. In a heartbeat, I repeat the entire process.